Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Will from Star Hearth Astrology, and today I'm continuing my series on the rising signs as archetypal life paths. So if you want a full explanation of this, you can check out my intro video to this series, which you can find on my channel. But basically what we're doing is we're looking at the rising signs using a whole sign house system and discovering that, right, when we use a whole sign house system, there are deeper implications to your rising sign than just being the sign on your ascendant, right? And in fact, it creates a system where every Cancer rising will have Cancer in the first, and Leo in the second, and Virgo in the third, and so on and so forth. And so what we can look for is using the idea of the archetypes of those signs and the topics of those houses. We can say more than just about your appearance or your way of functioning in the world as based on your rising sign. And we can see how, as a Cancer rising, you navigate the world in different flavors. So we're using the techniques of traditional astrology. We'll be using traditional rulerships. And today we're going to talk about the archetypal life paths of Cancer rising. So I'm going to pull up the chart so that we can see what it is that I'm talking about. Okay. So here in the chart, we can see we have Cancer in the first house, we have Leo in the second, Virgo in the third, so on and so forth. And I'm going to start with talking about Cancer in the first house, and then we're going to go house by house and kind of illuminate this pattern of what it means to be a Cancer rising. So when we have Cancer in the first house, right, that means that the ascendant is going to be in Cancer, and the ruler of Cancer is the moon. So we get a moon ruled chart, right? These are children of the moon. And what does it mean to be a child of the moon? Well, it means to live very close to the earth, because the moon is our supreme translator between the heavenly things and the earthly things, right? It is the only planetary body that orbits the earth when we're talking about astrology, right? It is the translator of the other planets of the stars into our experience. And right, that's because our, even these longer term transits that we have are going to show up in lunar ways, so in daily ways. Right, we might be having a Saturn transit that's going to last a couple years, but we're going to notice it through the way that it permeates our daily life, the way that it's changing our daily life. And so the moon is the facilitator of that. And to be a Cancer rising is to be a lunar being. So with Cancer rising, more than other charts, the position and the placement of the moon is going to be significant. And also of the sun. And that is because, right, using the idea of sect, right, whether you have a day chart or a night chart, that will give preference to the sun or the moon. So if the sun is above the horizon, if you find the ascendant, sometimes marked with an AS or AC, and then its opposite point, the descendant, which will always be in the 7th house. If the sun is above that line, you have a day chart, and the sun is the more significant luminary. If the sun is below that line, you have a night chart, and the moon is the more significant luminary, which is going to matter if your chart is ruled by the moon. Because if you're a Cancer rising that's born during the day, well, you're taking cues from the luminary that is not more powerful. Whereas if you're a Cancer rising that's born during the night, there's a little bit more ease and a little bit more grace with that. So we kind of start there. And now when we take the topics of the first house, our self-concept, our mental health, the way that we interact with the world, and we put it through the sign of Cancer, what we find is that ideas of safety become very important, right? There's a kind of insulated nature to Cancer, right? Cancer, the crab, has this rich sensitivity, this rich imagination, and it is shrouded in a very thick wall, right? Crabs have exoskeletons. And so, right, people will be able to feel whether they are in your inner circle or not because of that shell, right? So with Cancer risings, you can definitely tell whether you are on the outside or whether you're on the inside. And it can be very hard to go back and forth, right? So part of the Cancer archetype, once they have decided that someone is not safe and that they have lost trust for that person, it is going to be nearly impossible to regain that. Yeah, in the same way. And that is about keeping safe. There's a very rich tenderness and a nurturing quality to Cancer risings, but they are going to offer that only to the deserving. And so if you betray their trust, then you're going to be outside of that. Now the moon is also the fastest moving body. And so, right, to be a Cancer rising, to be ruled by the moon, right, when we look at it from a mental health perspective, we've got the moon changing signs every 2 days. And so there can be this moody kind of emotional quality, right? And you can see that shift very fast. There can also be very much this ebb and flow of energy and vitality, right? So it might not be as steady. Yeah, and a need for privacy can also be a piece of this. Okay, moving on to Leo in the second house. So the sun rules the second house for Cancer risings. And so we can look for where the sun falls in the chart to connect it to the second house to say, that is what is going to be most significant as a resource. So we're looking for that. Where do your resources come from? We look to where the sun falls in the chart of a Cancer rising. Now, this is going to show up very differently depending on where it is, depending on different charts, obviously. But there can be an organizing principle around, what do you do for money, right? And for Cancer risings, it's not just about the money piece. The money piece is the embodiment of a value system and a deep faith in what matters in the world. And we'll talk about that when we talk about where the Jupiter houses fall in the chart of a Cancer rising. But so, right, they want to be purpose driven for the most part, so that they can, right, not take from the world more than they're giving back to it. We have Virgo in the third house, the third house being the place where we organize our daily lives. And so Virgo being there can be very meticulous, right? We've got lots of details going on, and Virgo being very mindful of details. This can also be, if Cancer risings have significant Virgo placements, a really beautiful signature for teachers. because we have the tenderness of Cancer and then the meticulousness of Virgo in the third house of elementary education, right? And so we can also see with Cancer risings that kind of daily practice and daily life becomes a fertile spiritual ground, and is precious in that way. Now we have Libra in the fourth. And Libra in the fourth offers a story that our relationships and relational harmony serve as the foundation of our lives and our charts. And so often you will see, especially with an empowered Venus in the chart, Cancer risings have beautiful homes. They have an appreciation for the soothing nature of having beautiful things around us and harmonious environments, right? And we can kind of see, Cancer is not comfortable with a lot of emotional upheaval and conflict, and neither is Libra. And so, right, we can kind of see Cancers really need home environments that are quite peaceful. And if we have complicated placements in the fourth house, you're going to see perhaps a childhood that was not peaceful, but then the Cancer rising grows up, and right, what is most important is harmony in the home. So there can, all other things being equal in the chart, be this kind of distaste for conflict, or conflict can exist in the Aries place, in the 10th house, in the life's work, but home becomes a retreat from that. So so there's a big piece there. And now again, we're going to check on where Venus is. Now for Cancer risings, they have their 4th house and 11th house ruled by the same planet, right? So Venus also rules Taurus. And so connection to friends and community being really a key part of feeling like home is balanced. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the 11th house. But right, we want to start thinking about which pieces of life are connected based on the rulerships of the signs for each rising sign. Then we have the 5th house. And the 5th house is the place of play and creativity, of children, of experimenting, of engaging in life in this joyful, creative way. It can be a self-expression. There's generally a kind of youthful selfishness in the way we do the 5th house. And having Scorpio there can be a little bit of a morbid bent to the 5th house, right? There's an intensity to this engagement. And we're gonna see how that shows up depending on what's in the 5th house and depending on where Mars falls in the chart, right? Now, in the same way that we have Venus ruling both the 4th and the 11th, we have Mars ruling both the 5th and the 10th. So, right, we're going to see passion showing up in these ways, right? There's a kind of mission-driven quality to what we're doing in the world in a 10th house way, and it shows up in a commitment and dedication to our hobbies with Scorpio in the 5th, right? What we're doing for fun, just because it might be fun, doesn't mean it's going to be casual. It's not going to be casual. It's not going to be done flippantly. Right, so that might mean that we get involved in hobbies and we spend hours and hours and hours researching them and perfecting skills. And there's this real kind of focus and drive and commitment and obsession there. Then we have the 6th house. where Sagittarius is. And this, I think we end up seeing how our beliefs become what we're committed to changing in the world. Because the sixth house is the place of service. It's the place where we kind of where we honor the things that we believe by dedicating hard work to them. So the sixth house being ruled by Jupiter with all the passion of Sagittarius is committed to serving the things that it believes in, right? And is really willing to work hard in that way. We also see that the ninth house, the place of belief, is the other house ruled by Jupiter. So Jupiter as the ruler of both Sagittarius and Pisces, right? We see the way in which whatever we have faith in terms of the ninth house, we are committed to serving in this daily way in the sixth house. And it may not even be that, right, our spiritual beliefs when we're a Cancer rising are super intellectual or super mapped out or super creed focused, but they may be more intuitive, but their practice becomes this place of passion and belief, right? So it might be that we are an environmental scientist and we feel, you know, in a ninth house way, feel that taking care of the environment and understanding that we're a part of everything, right, is really our spiritual pole star. And then the way that we do that in a sixth house way is dedicating ourselves to the survival of the Pacific salmon, and dedicating our daily work to that. So it can show up in that kind of service way. Now, as with any chart, when we get to Capricorn and Aquarius, we have two consecutive signs ruled by the same planet. And I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense to have Saturn ruling both the 7th and the 8th houses, because their topics, I feel, are so connected. And so we have Saturn ruling the 7th house of marriage and partnerships. Cancer risings are committers for the most part, right? I can think of exceptions to where that might not be so, but for the most part, we having Saturn rule the 7th and the 8th is these people, they may take a long time to settle down, or they may, they may get married later in life, but the commitment lasts a long time, and relationships themselves are taken very seriously, whether that leads to commitment or not. So they may get taken so seriously that the person is never willing to commit, or they may get taken so seriously that, right, that deep, long-lasting commitment becomes hugely significant. And especially in the last few years when we've had Saturn transiting these signs, because Saturn in the 7th house is being very intentional with relationships, and that's getting into them, that's getting out of them, that's deciding what they're for and how much you're willing to give them. And so the 7th house tends to be the more visible house. The 8th house, right, is shared resources. I think of the 7th house as, right, that's the place where we're committed on paper. The 8th house is the deep intimacy. And now here we get a little bit of a paradox. And we always get this between the 1st house and the 8th house, because the relationship of the 1st house and the 8th house is a quincunx or an inconjunct, right? They're not visible to each other by a major aspect. And so what we discover in deep intimacy with others is the inconsistencies in our personality, the ways in which we don't quite fit together and we don't quite make sense. And so with Cancer that prizes this emotional intimacy and this closeness and this safety, right? You would expect that there would be a lot of closeness. And yet the 8th house being ruled by Aquarius needs the air to breathe, right? Getting close to it doesn't necessarily mean, crawling inside of another person and understanding them. What you get close to is this kind of sense of someone's personal sovereignty. And so, right, to a commitment of this kind in an 8th house way is going to be very sensitive to power dynamics, to encroachment. So, right, Cancer, right, can be very tender and very kind, but once you start trying to dominate it, you're going to be cast outside. It's going to be very sensitive and understand when that is happening. And so that Aquarius in the 8th house keeps them clean, but sometimes it can resist that deeper intimacy. And really that can be a fear of the emotions of themselves and others. And so it can be, when you do it into 8th house situations, which are going to be situations of really intense emotions, or interpersonal conflict, interpersonal contact, right? There may actually be an emotional shutdown, because for Cancer risings, emotions are so potent. And so, right, it might be a step back into the rationality of Aquarius as a defense mechanism against the overwhelming affect or vulnerability of Cancer. Now in the 9th house, we have Pisces ruled by Jupiter. But Pisces and Sagittarius are different in that Pisces is going to be the faith over the kind of belief or the creed or the missionary quality of Sagittarius. And one thing about the 9th house is that it also involves our long-term kind of plans, our sense of where we're going over the long term. And so the Cancer rising quality might not have a 10-year plan. It might be hard to identify these concrete goals because there is it's just so much more kind of intuitive and in the moment than that. Right, again, we have the seat of the self, the 1st house, ruled by the moon. That's always in a different phase, that's moving faster than anything else in the sky, right? Which is not to say that it's frenetic, it's just to say that it is changeable. And so the sense of, we're not going to have this plan in the same way. Of what we need to accomplish in order to be who we think we are, right? It's much more of a moving with the tides and taking our cues from kind of secret sources. Now the 10th house is Aries, very purpose driven. And I love the tension between the 10th house and the 1st house because it's always like, the 10th house is beyond us. It's always an ambition that pulls us beyond ourselves. And so while Cancer may be more comfortable in a more cloistered space, the 10th house and Aries and this desire to accomplish things is going to move them outside of that. And again, we're going to look for Mars to give us clues, with Mars in the 7th, right? Is it our partner that pushes us beyond ourselves? Is it the ambition of our partner? Right? Who is motivating us to move beyond that fear of vulnerability and take on this kind of open challenge of Aries in the 10th? With Taurus in the 11th, one thing that I see with Taurus in the 11th for Cancer risings is they're kind of non-human friends. So Taurus also being the sign that represents our relationship with the natural world, and that happening in the 11th house of friendship and groups and alliances and the sense of belonging. And so there can be a real kinship of being out in nature and feeling a part of things. And I think that shows up in beautiful ways. In terms of Gemini in the 12th, I think what we see is Cancer risings, for the most part, not relying too heavily on words, not being super verbal. So I wonder if anyone's a Cancer rising, if they even made it this far with my very wordy nature. But I think it's also Gemini in the 12th shows an impatience for small talk, right? All of the kind of frenetic, buzzing thoughts of Gemini get suppressed in the 12th house, and there can be an impatience for that. And so communication can end up, I think, being fairly unclear for Cancer risings because it gets discredited as, or maybe, it's not taken as seriously as some other signs might take it. So that's what I have for you for the archetypal life path of Cancer rising. If you are a Cancer rising, if you know a Cancer rising, let me know how this resonated or didn't. I'd love to hear the feedback. And check out my other rising signs as archetypal life paths videos to get to know yourselves and each other. Okay, bye.